we'll never escape a session that everything's not up for grabs again. Rent control will always be on the docket because of the environment that we're in. So you're a property manager, and just for instance, you have someone out there that's listening, and you found an issue that is just grating on you and your business and your clients and the whole thing. We have a real process for you.
Welcome back to Nevada Realtors Today, your place for timely updates on the news and trends that matter to realtors in the Silver State. Featuring your host, 2026 President Sarah Scatini, and CEO Tiffany Banks of Nevada Realtors. Now let's jump into today's episode of Nevada Realtors Today.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about the Property Management Committee, what we're doing this year. But before I do that, I want to introduce the vice chair for this year for the PM Committee, which is Kristin Gandolfo. And then we've got Christopher Bishop, who is our Legislative Committee chair. We're going to have a little conversation between Property Management and Legislative in just a moment. But the Nevada Realtors Property Management Committee this year is really focusing on a couple of things. We're going to get to the legislative because that's super important. There's a lot that happens during the legislative session with laws and proposed bills related to property management, of course, landlord-tenant laws. But we're also kind of looking at best practices, and are there some resources that as a committee we can provide at the state level, and really kind of look at being that go-to source for managers who often have questions and don't quite know where to turn. The common thing, go ask your broker, and the broker's like, well, what's the association saying? So we can maybe bridge that gap and really help be that resource. So that's kind of our goal, our intention for the committee this year. I'm really excited as the chair this year to be able to help with that process. Part of what we talked about is having kind of these webinars / podcasts that we're doing, for example, today. And it naturally made sense that after our legislative session to begin the conversation with legislative, because here we are. It's not a legislative year, so in that regard, we're kind of like, let's get back to the grind and get busy at just managing doors and all the stuff that comes in the life of being a property manager. And by the way, all three of us do property management, so we can all relate to this stuff. But the other part is, all right, we know that the legislation is, or the legislators are only meeting biennially. Well, that's not exactly what's happening behind the scenes. There's still stuff going on, and maybe stuff that we need to be concerned about, and how can we really even understand the process. And personally, having literally been to seeing both sides of it now that I've been serving on the legislative committee for a bit and helping with that whole process and the sausage, if you will, testifying in front of subcommittees, I literally see both sides of it. And I know Christopher does as well, and Kristin. So we can really help managers, I think, and I hope, to understand this process and how they can be advocating and understanding what that looks like a little bit more. So I'm going to start off, and then Chris, maybe you can take it from here. What kind of give us an idea of what that process looks like? Well, like, what are some best practices for managers in terms of advocacy and sort of maybe staying informed, what's going on, so they can be aware and knowledgeable and share that with their clients and best practices for themselves as well.
Before I jump into that, I do want to point something out that I think is really cool. So on the local level in Southern Nevada, we've had a property management committee for a very long time, and something I've interacted with all of you on and understand. But when I was president of the state in 2020, there wasn't a property management committee, and it came forward because I was not supposed to have a session as a Nevada Realtors president, or as anything playing on a session. And one pandemic changed all of that. And of course, we were all shut down, the whole thing. And every issue that came out of that year was property management related. How are people staying in their homes? How are tenants moving through the process? And so I'm always leery when I hope that I won't have a session, that it pops up. And so, but I think one of the great things was we heard from every property manager in the state, not a few of them, not one of them, but every one of them. And it started this committee, which is now 6 years past that time frame. And you guys are providing amazing value back to property managers statewide. So kudos on you for doing that. Kudos on you for being involved. But to the question you just asked, Paul, the first step is being somewhat involved. It doesn't mean that you have to go down and stick yourself into committee meetings, which it's always great info, you should, but it's about getting access to the info. You guys are providing webinars like this. They're providing emails that come out from Nevada Realtors. Like, you can't really be upset about something unless you've investigated a little bit of research, right? And so I think that we're doing everything we can to get the message out. And so not only participating yourself, but also telling others that, hey, I found this resource. The second thing I'll say is that I think a lot of people feel that they won't be heard or they can't be heard, and that's just not true. All the way from the local level, all the way to the state, we want to hear. It may not feel like it at the time, but we want to hear it. And the real change gets affected by you putting your voice out there. A lot of the bills and things that we're talking about, a lot of the things that get run by legislators are tenants or family members or property managers that tell a legislator, I have this problem. And it may not be a big problem, but it becomes a big problem then. And now we're dealing with a bill. And so versus, you could have gone to the property management committee, you could have gone to the legislative committee, you could have gone to the state president, the CEO, and just said, hey, I have this concern. What are you guys doing to address it? And I don't know anyone here that isn't going to respond to that. And so I think that probably, as we say, the first line of defense, see something, say something. And I think that's always good advice for everybody. That's what you tell anybody in that position.
It is remarkable to me the amount of property managers, at least in Northern Nevada. I don't know how it is in Vegas. You guys are really awesome down there, but who are not informed as to what's going on behind the scenes, especially like in a legislative year. I had people asking, like, even when some laws had changed, even just as simple as like the refunding of application fees, like all those things that happened. They're like, well, when did that take place? Right. And I'm like, we have a duty as licensed property managers to understand the laws to protect our interest and our clients' interests. So the amount of management that doesn't understand what's going on in the background and isn't informed when laws are changed. I'm just encouraging everyone to be more involved, because it's our job to do that. And it seems like it's something so simple, but really just being that person to make sure that everyone is understanding that things are changing and that you have to be involved, and that there are things legislative year that were off the table, but they're going to come back, and just understanding and being involved, because it's our job. We should understand and know and fight.
You lead into something that, and I got to give Paul kudos for this, because him and I got the opportunity to sit down with some legislators. I think, Paul, it may have been last year, right before the session. And there's also a misconception that we're all the same as far as property managers. There's so many different levels of realtor property managers, licensees that are property managers, community managers, association managers, and apartment managers. Like they're all different levels that don't communicate the same. They're not part of the same group. And I would say that probably in front of all of them would be, the Nevada Association of Realtors, as it stands for the realtor members that are property managers. We lead probably the most of that activity. And then you have the apartment association that has, apartment managers, completely different goals and processes and things that are out there. And so like sometimes they'll see something and think they did it. No, we didn't. And we're the only ones standing to try to fix it. So just be careful too who you blame and the perception of where they're coming from.
Both of you made some really, really great points, and just to maybe piggyback on a couple of those concepts would be that in being informed, and hopefully we've got a couple of folks on here that maybe aren't property managers and not super involved, because if you represent a investor client, it's going to be super important for you to know these things. And just as an example, and I don't know the efficacy of this law, but for example, it's like I'm raining down pearls of wisdom when I talk about the fact that in 2019, for goodness sakes, they require that somebody who manages their own property has to have a notarized lease. And it's as if I just, was sharing this wisdom that came from above. No, that's kind of old news, folks, right? So it is important for all of us to be involved. And there's a sort of that famous oft quoted, maybe over quoted saying that says, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
Yeah.
And it's so true here, especially in the world of property management, because like it or lump it, there is, as to Chris's point, that whole perception of, the squeaky wheel that gets the cheese. Maybe we're not having those conversations enough to where we understand that we have to maybe promote best practices to the best of our ability, so that it doesn't come to the legislature and we can make sure that some of those best practices are happening within our industry.
You brought up something that I think is missed by like a broker who isn't a property manager liability that just came up in what you said, because what's happening is realtor members who access the realtor provided lease, they have one that's for property managed by a property manager and one's for owners managed by an owner. And so as a regular licensee, I can provide them with that, go through the processes. I'm not managing the property. But all the time, brokers see agents use the wrong lease and rope the brokerage into liability of claiming they represent a tenant that they don't, or claiming they represent an owner that they don't. And that is one that scares the hell out of me as a broker, and one that we have been, promoting. Don't do that. If your owner is going to do it, I believe it's AB 160, Paul. I could be wrong, but I think it was AB 160, and I think it actually says it on our lease at the top of it, the one that requires the notary, and that's solely for an owner with their own tenant. And that one piece, I can't tell you how many emails and how many white papers that came out and stuff from Nevada Realtors saying, do you know this? Are you making sure you're doing this right? But it's one that got overlooked. And that was a great step forward in protecting the tenant. I think it came from people squatting in properties saying that they had a lease when we came to find out it wasn't actually a valid lease. And that notary factor was hopefully an extra layer to get people to do it correctly.
Absolutely, absolutely. So with that in mind, this is sort of an off year, and as you mentioned, I think it was pretty early actually where we had that meeting on a non-legislative year. If you remember that, Chris, they kind of were licking their wounds from the 2023 session. This was in 2024, and we got together with these legislators and had an open dialogue and a conversation. Now, keep in mind, we're a representative democracy, which means not everybody is going to literally have a seat at the table, but these committees can help carry those messages to those folks, and we'll continue to have those conversations. So with that in mind, what are some of the things that maybe managers should do when they get the rumor mill going, right? Because they don't hear about the laws that actually went into effect, but they sure hear about a lot of the stuff that, well, I heard, did you hear so-and-so said blah, blah, blah. And next thing you know, it's just like, let's get the torches and the pitchforks out and let's go crazy, right? So what should they think about on a non-legislative year about what to prepare for the next legislative session in terms of that involvement, in terms of that getting the right information and not just reacting to every last thing that they hear? Any thoughts there from the two of you?
I love that people are being proactive even with their pitchforks and talking about it, because I feel like up here it's not talked about enough, honestly. I would love it more people had opinions and actually talked about things, even if it's after the fact. That's why I really appreciate, Paul, your Facebook group that you created for property management, because what a great platform for us to have really hard discussions. But I wish more property management or property managers in Northern Nevada talked about it more. I really do.
Well, it's a great point. I'm looking at it from one perspective. It's great to have that. Remember, we're a state association, so it's good to know that
Yeah.
kind of perspective. My perspective is we get people that get real hot. They're not maybe super involved, but man, they're going to light up as soon as they hear something. It's like, come on, let's go. This is, where do we need to go? Who do we beat up, right? So it's like the schoolyard bully. So any thoughts on your end, Chris?
Yeah, a couple. So, I've heard from some members that don't care until it affects them. It's tragic. It is what it is. And I can't make everyone participate in the process, but there definitely is a group that doesn't want to be bothered unless it directly affects what they're doing. I'm of the other mind that I don't want to be sideswiped by something that I could have prevented. So I will say, we've built decades of credibility in Carson City so that legislators listen to Nevada realtors, right? And it's not done because of who's participating. It's done because of all of us. Like, we've used the ability to say we're different. We want to craft good quality legislation that protects Nevadans, that protects private property rights, and that allows us to conduct a business. Now, I do want to remind legislators, like we did, and our members. You and I sat in that room, Paul, with legislative leadership at the time, and they didn't think full circle that they have to understand I represent clients, I represent investors, owners, and tenants equally. All of them are my client. Like, I can't sell homes to buyers that, and eliminate them. They're part of my infrastructure for my business. So I do care what happens to tenants. A lot of people say we don't. And it was perception from those legislators, because there's a difference between a realtor who's selling houses and doing property management versus maybe an apartment manager that just gets paid an hourly rate to sit at the apartment complex and just manage that little slice of heaven. And so I think that them understanding that we're different in that was important. You saw that in the room. I saw that in the room. So we kind of get lumped together. That's not fair. The rumor mill part of it, bad press sells faster, right? And I think what we want is we want a reason to be upset about something in order to rush in and fix it. And what I've kind of come to find out is you can't do that and get as much play if I just tell my scope of friends, right? We have a unique reach to reach 20 plus thousand members in the state. And so that's a voting group on both sides of the aisle. We don't pick sides. Like, I don't care what party you're with, independent, Democrat, or I don't care. The only thing I care is that I can practice real estate and then we defend that industry. And so I think that people need to be reminded that that is the entire focal point of the PAC, Nevada Realtors PAC, and Nevada Realtors Legislative Committee. I'm not looking at how to, craft one party over another. I'm looking at how to protect an industry. And that's why I think your participation in it's so important, which you guys have stepped up and you've done. And then last but not least, it's probably how we each affect our client base. So Paul, you have a ton of properties that you manage. Kristin, you have the same thing. Those are owners and tenants on both sides that my interaction with them is going to lead to whether they tell their cousin who's a legislator or their friend who's running for office that, oh, the whole industry's bad. Well, it's not true. Like, we don't sell enough of the great positive press, and that's why these webinars are important. But sure, one thing happens on one deal once in a while out of tens of thousands of transactions. Now we got a new law. And so that's really, that happened just the last session. We had a legislator whose relative member was not approved through the right process, and they wanted to change the entire thing for everybody. And there's not a session that's gone by I participated in the last, I don't know, 10, that hasn't happened. And so we really make things happen, good or negative each way.
One Nevada. I love that.
Nevada.
Absolutely. So kind of my last thought, and then we can sort of kind of wind things down after that is what should we be aware of in terms of what's on the horizon? We know that there's this kind of this term sine die, there all the vetoes that took place, and there were 87 vetoes total, not all landlord tenant or real estate related. But because the government did it after the session, there is an opportunity potentially for a lot of these bills to come back. And so anything that we should maybe be aware of and have these conversations with ahead of time in anticipation of the next legislation. For example, and I'm trying to remember the number, was it 44, AB 44, where it was a price fixing or a price gouging bill, but there was some elements of rent control within that.
Yeah.
And for me, for example, who would not be opposed to during some sort of a natural disaster to allow for some protection for price gouging? Nobody wants that $5 case of water that the store already bought for $2 to go to $85, right? That makes sense. It's just a matter of what happened in that particular case was the metric used was not something that was concrete. It was more of a, well, we kind of feel like, for lack of a better word, we feel like that's price gouging, and that included the housing market. So there's things like that. Anything that's on the horizon that we should be aware of, and what can we as an industry look at for this coming legislative session?
So I'm just going to tell you as the legislative chair that it's all on the table, unfortunately, and we'll never escape a session that everything's not up for grabs again. We paid attention the most. We tracked, I believe, over 900 bills that we vetted. We followed about 80 of them specifically affecting real estate property management in different parts of it. AB 121 was the rental fee transparency. AB 223 was the habitability claims and how they're processed. We always see bills that come protecting fair housing and discrimination claims like AB 341. We always see eviction controversies as it flows through the court systems and stuff, and how that's paid for. So we had several bills that went to that. But here's the big ones from my perspective. Rent control will always be on the docket because of the environment that we're in and because of the fact that there are so many that may believe that it's the right thing. And there's so much that we showed last year where it doesn't help. It can actually deter and do the opposite. And all of this streams from affordability. Like, there's no question, I think, in all of our minds that if homes were more affordable, we wouldn't be having as big of an argument on rent control. And as homes become worth more, so does rents. And I think we saw that over it. But rent control will still be a big one. Nevada Realtors positioned themselves to take a major stance that we're against rent control. We're not against people. We're not against seniors, or we're not against kids. We're not against housing, but we are against you limiting the ability for property to be well maintained, for an owner to be able to make the payment. And I think the conversation flowed a lot to, you're not harming these large corporations. You're harming people like mom and pops that were forced to move or forced to rent their property, or they had to relocate as a military relocation or a job transfer. Like, they're left with no other options. And so, I mean, that was a big one. Corporate homeownership is going to play a major role in this upcoming session because we have multiple facets in the state government that are saying, we want people to have the first shot, and then whatever's left, we'll sell these homes to corporations. That probably will be the major talking point. I'm already in multiple conversations about it right now with legislators on both sides of the aisle. The governor's talking about it. People want to make sure Nevadans can purchase homes. And I think we're all vested in the same idea, but it's about how we get there. And then one of the ones that we may not think about that definitely is on our radar is insurance. Because of the fires that are going on, because of the natural disasters that are happening, I have multiple of my investors that are having issues getting insurance on their properties before. Now they're turning them into rental properties, and it's even harder. And so I think that, if I have an owner that owns a portfolio and they can't insure that portfolio, I don't know that they're going to stay an owner. Like they might start selling those properties, which may not be the best thing. And if we can't get insurance, we can't sell mortgages. And so, like, these are big, major issues within our state that I think are going to be in the top 3 or 4. And then, last but not least, I mean, we see this every year as HOAs. There are always bills that become run because of HOA issues. I'd actually like to hear from you both on what HOA issues you're seeing as a property manager. I have one owner that seems to just upset his HOA. And he gets a message every month about something. And so a lot of times the bills are nuisances where it's a group of people infighting and it makes it all the way to the state legislature, which I think is always kind of interesting. Do you guys see that too?
100%. I'm kind of a unique perspective. I actually owned an HOA company and was a CAM for a while. I survived that. And I now teach the people that are getting into it. And so I try to keep my ear to the ground as much as possible. And my interactions literally sometimes come to the point of, I'm so glad I had this experience with this company because I'm going to use this as a case study for my classes. This is just crazy. Now, that being said, they have an association and they have, people that by and large are trying to do the right thing. And it's just sort of those bad actors in that industry that create the consternation to where the legislature decides they have to step in. We're one of the most regulated states in the country for community associations. Even our next door neighbor in California, you want to manage a community, you got a real estate, great, start managing communities. And there's no extra licensure or anything like that. So because of all those things, we see a lot of things, and for example, records, NRS 116 talks about the transfer of records, but it's sufficiently vague to where you've got lease that is required to be provided in a property management agreement, and then they switch the management company because when a board comes on, they throw the baby out with the bathwater. Everybody goes, so you're starting all over with a new management company, and some of those records don't make it over. And those kinds of things, or the fee restrictions that they've been trying to do, and what's some new creative fee that we can create to get some more revenue, but get to as close to the edge of the law. I still see a lot of those types of issues. How about you, Kristen?
I don't really have any of those sorts of issues. My issues with HOAs are more centralized. I have one condo building, in particular that I have several rentals from, and there's just not enough funds in some of these HOAs to fix issues, especially in relations to like central boiler systems. So for me as a property manager, and I'm on a deadline for repairs, especially when it is heat or water related, I'm having to relocate tenants just because there's a lack of funds.
That's an excellent point. And, closely related to that, besides the fact that funding is a major issue and there's a lot of complicated insurance costs are going up for them. During the pandemic, when I was still managing, roof estimates, the reserve study calculated 20,000 a roof, and we were getting 42,000 roof. Even if they had the funding that they thought they were supposed to have, they're still suffering from that inflation, things like that. But then on top of that, we've got the issue now years ago where, funny enough, with here we are so regulated, and yet that condo collapse, and I can't remember the name of the city, states all over the country have enacted restrictions and structural engineering certification, things like that.
Yeah.
It's been proposed, but never really made much traction. So I anticipate something like that will eventually make it across the finish line as well.
We saw that. We saw that in Southern Nevada, and not to talk specifics, but my own personal team was doing a transaction with a long-term client, and they live in a condo community, and the condo went from $250 a month to $500 a month for a condo, and it was because of their reserves were depleted. They had no infrastructure. It made the news, and then you have this poor homeowner that owns their property free and clear, and you imagine $500 a month for an HOA when your payment wasn't $500 a month for the property. And to that same point, like, Chris was saying, I mean, boilers are a term we don't use here in Southern Nevada. We boil when we go outside, but it was because of the reserves of the community and that whole thing, they had none. And so it had been mismanaged and misdone and things that happened. I want to say one thing, Paul, that you brought up earlier, and I think it's the effect of real change. So you're a property manager, and just for instance, you have someone out there that's listening, and you found an issue that is just grating on you and your business and your clients and the whole thing. We have a real process where I can give you multiple examples, and I'll give you one. My dad, who's also a property manager, had been the legislative chair, had been a state president, all those other fun things. He had a tenant that kept getting fine notices from the HOA. and it was over trash cans, right? We've seen this. And it was to the point where it was incessant over and over and over. And the fines were adding up. And like every time they would reach out, they're like, we don't have any cans out there. There's nothing out there. Prove it. And there was no process in place to prove it. And so he actually, through the process, ran a bill that said you must provide a photo, documented proof of the violation, right? I mean, that's common sense. But yet, all of these litigations and things that were going on because of it, it's a prime example how you, if you have an issue, can run it through. And if it makes sense, a lot of times we can get a lot of the legislators on good quality bills to add in common sense. I know that sounds funny, but it's doable. Another one, a great example of the same thing was, deployed service member who's out, deployed outside of the country, has their HOA set up on auto pay, and the HOA ups the fee $7. And because they're deployed for 12 months, they don't see it and they don't have access to it every day. The HOA is trying to foreclose on them. And so we passed a bill that says you can't do that. And so, I mean, these were things that happened in real life transactions that we saw that we were able to affect a state law that re-regulated how we do the process. And so I want to make it clear to everybody, you can affect positive change. It just may not be your perspective that gets passed. It is vetted through a pretty big process. And you've seen some of that as well, have you?
Absolutely, 100%. And I think that's a perfect segue to kind of going back to the beginning, that full 180 of, it is in fact an opportunity for you to have your voice heard. It may not be every person's voice is going to be heard the exact same way, but there is that opportunity. There is a vehicle for you. It's important to understand that there's a process, but that we are here to kind of be that representative to carry these discussions forward. And as you mentioned, you made some great comments about things that really did improve that particular industry in terms of common issue communities and things like that. So just for anybody that's listening, just keep in mind that while you may not in other words, you get property managers together, for example, in a room, you get 10 property managers, you're going to get 15 opinions, right? Everybody's got an opinion. But understand, nevertheless, your voice can be heard, and there's a way for us to have those conversations, and through that process, it's kind of like making sausage, just like the legislature. It may not look exactly like you thought it was going to, but absolutely, our association gives you that opportunity. So, Kristin, any final thoughts or comments, and then I'll let Kristin share a few things.
I just really appreciate that you're doing this, Paul. One thing that I've learned about you is you're a doer. And I love that. So I know, especially in Vegas, if there's anybody that has any issues or questions, like the two of you are great resources.
Well, thanks, Kristin. We sure appreciate you being on the Step Up, and it's great to get to know folks from all over the state by serving in capacities like this. So, Chris, any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, just to give kind of a quick little update on where we're at and what the plan is, and to let you know that we're not just sitting here waiting for something to unfold. So, every year as we start the session, my job as legislative chair actually starts the year preceding the session. And so that's for a couple of things. It's to get ready, it's to review what happened in the session before, it's to kind of mobilize the process. In years past, there was very few major effective changes we could make as an industry targeted at the legislature to say, hey, we'd like to have this happen. A lot of it was defensive. We were trying to defend let's not kill the entire real estate market this year. Let's keep this progressing. In my year as state president, like my biggest concern was real estate agents being able to help people access and convey properties. And we had to do everything we could in a special session to say, let's leave the industry open. We're essential. Like having a place to live is essential. Having the ability to move is essential. And so we've kind of broken up into some subgroups this year to focus on specific issues. That's property tax, corporate wholesale owners, homeowners insurance, the real estate division and its funding process, general HOA issues, which we see, and then summary eviction and landlord tenant items. And Paul, you've picked up the gauntlet on summary eviction and landlord tenant items, and your entire committee will be involved in that process in correlation with the legislative committee. And I think the whole thing is, what do we hope to accomplish? We hope to identify major issues within our industry that are something we'd like to fix, something that's a problem that may need to be fixed, and also police ourselves to say, property managers are the first ones to point out bad actors. Like, I don't want to be known as a bad actor, and I don't want other people doing it because it harms my consumers, it harms my tenants. And so we want to kind of look out for that while, preserving the industry. And so it's our goal to kind of culminate those issues, and that comes from the members. So anyone listening could reach out on any of those items to the leadership group as it goes through to Nevada Realtors and kind of give your opinion. Email works great, by the way. If you want to send me a 13-page dissertation of what's happened, I'll read it. And we'll see what we can do about making that part of the process. And then from there, we have some realtor champions, and I want to put that out. What that means that there are legislators, there are elected officials that champion issues having to do with real estate. And again, these are legislators on all sides of the aisle that have worked hard on real estate issues. They do want to preserve the industry. They do want to maintain the Nevada homeownership ability. They do want to protect private property rights. And so we tell you about these people, and we tell you to vote for them because I've many times, I've voted for people outside of my party because they're realtor champions. And I want to know about them, and I want to know what they're doing to help or hurt my industry because that's how I support my family. And so there's a lot of information coming forward from us on that I know you guys will be sharing. And then last but not least, we make this merry-go-round from your participation in the Political Survival Fund. And Greg Martin's famous for saying it's an investment. He's right about that. To have an income, to have an industry I work in, to have a job for the next 30, 40 years, hopefully, God willing. I need this industry to allow me to do my job to help my clients. And so I invest into the Political Survival Fund for that reason. And each of you as members have that opportunity. You may not like the politics of the board. You may not like the people on the board. Heck, I've been there myself. But you do want to have an industry to practice in, and that gives you the conduit to be able to do it. And then last but not least, no matter what happens, every single week, if not every single month, we're sending out videos, we're sending out emails, we're sending out the advocate. A lot of people have opted out of it, if you can believe that. They've actually gone and said, stop sending me this info about my industry. I don't even understand that. So if it's you and you didn't mean to, call Nevada Realtors, get back on the list. But we're going to tell you about all the bills that are coming out, how it's happening, what's happening when it happens. And so make sure you're participating in that. And then, we're going to digest the session. We're going to have a lot of info flowing. This webinar is a great example of that, Paul. We're going to have more of those type of things. We're going to have it's not soup yet, and I want to explain that. The reason why we say it is because when we get into the session, there's a lot of crazy stuff. There's a lot of things happening. There's a lot of messages that are out there that aren't anything other than words and hot air. And until it's actually a law, there's a lot of things we get upset about that never culminate. And so that's why we say it's not soup yet. And so there's a little podcast that comes out with a bunch of us that will be involved. And Paul will see you and Kristin take part in that in different ways through property management. But the whole thing is, calm down until it's actually a law. And then even when it becomes a law, we've seen the last effect is the regulation. People pass laws all the time that they can't regulate. And so just understanding that there is a method to our madness, and we'd love you to be involved.
Thank you so much. And, with that, I think I just kind of close with the reminder that on the property management side as well, we will be doing this on a quarterly basis. I look forward to continuing these types of conversations. And the idea of email is great, is perfect for me as well. So pm@paulrich.realtor. Any comments, snide remarks, I'll take those too. I've got thick skin. We love to hear feedback from you, and we look forward to continuing these conversations and just really trying to make our industry the best that it can be. There's a whole bunch of us out there, contrary to maybe sometimes popular opinion, that property managers truly do care and want to absolutely represent not just our landlords, but home ownership right, property rights, as well as if we don't have tenants that, as to Chris's point, tenants that are happy, our landlords aren't going to be happy either. So we want best practices for them as well. So look for lots more of these types of discussions and resources as we develop them. And again, thank you, Kristin, for being here as well and being the vice chair and all of your time and effort and energy. And Chris, appreciate you being with us today. And we look forward to our next conversation. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.